No goodbye, no speech, just a box, and a man I'd never met before, standing awkwardly by my desk, waiting to escort me out of the building I helped build. I handed over my badge without a word. The new CEO had called it a strategic pivot, 17 years distilled into 2 sterile words. I walked past a row of monitors, running code. I'd written systems I'd hardened, patched, revised 100 times over, firewalls that had held through global breaches, databases that still bore my naming conventions. But I no longer had access. The final blow came quietly. In the middle of a Thursday, I was updating a compliance table when the permissions error popped up. Access denied. A few minutes later, a calendar invite appeared. Transition meeting. 15 mins. I didn't make a scene. What would be the point? They'd already rewritten the script. When I entered the room, 3 of them were waiting: HR, the new CTO, and a smug man in a crisp jacket I didn't recognize. Brandon Tate, consultant, external optimization lead. He sat there like he already owned the place. Elaine, we're grateful for your contributions, the CTO began, eyes flicking to the script on his tablet. But as we evolve toward a leaner architecture, some legacy positions are no longer aligned with future priorities. Legacy, strategy. That was the word that stuck. They meant me. I'd been there since the company's second funding round. Back when our servers were duct-taped and coffee-powered, I'd overseen the cloud migration, built their encryption layers, mentored half the current engineering team. And now I was legacy. I stood up, smoothed the front of my blazer. Understood, I said. Brandon smiled, relieved. Maybe, or smug. I didn't look back as I walked out, but I saw enough. Brandon had already pulled up a dashboard I built. He didn't even know what half the columns meant, but he'd talk fast, wear sharp suits, and the board would love him, because Flash sells better than Foundation. I stepped into the parking lot and stood still for a moment. The wind tugged at the lapel of my coat. My reflection in the glass doors behind me looked older than I remembered, tired, but solid. They had replaced me like a worn-out part, but they hadn't destroyed me. They'd only confirmed what I'd been trying not to admit. This wasn't incompetence. It was erasure, deliberate, methodical, and something told me Brandon wasn't the only one playing a role. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I drove home in silence, but I wasn't done, not even close. There was a time I wouldn't leave the office until the janitors started turning off lights. Back when Halcyon was just 30 people and a dozen machines running hotter than they should have. The coffee was bad, the HVAC worse, and we stored sensitive client data on a local server wedged beneath someone's desk. I stayed because I believed in what we were building, not just the code, but the mission. That belief became the architecture. I designed the firewall structure during a snowstorm, slept in the office that night because the power flickered at home, and I didn't trust the backup generator. I was 6 months into a divorce and holding my team together with caffeine, documentation, entreteur, and a steady voice. We didn't have titles then, just problems to solve. I stayed through 5 reorgs, helped on board 4 different CTOs, never once asked for a promotion. I didn't care about ladder climbing. I cared about the code base, the infrastructure, the uptime. I cared about people knowing they could sleep at night because the system would hold. And when the budget didn't support the tools we needed, I used my own credit card. Once, I paid for a second set of intrusion detection licenses when we lost a key client, and the procurement team froze all new purchases. I didn't even expense it, just kept moving forward. I mentored every engineer who asked, taught them the parts of the system that weren't in the documentation, because I wrote most of the documentation. Ansichichi, Enkris, Osenkin. I knew what I left out. I wanted them to be better than me, faster, more secure, less burned out. I thought that loyalty would come back around, that if you gave enough, sacrificed enough, built with clean hands and clear eyes, it would mean something. Over the years, I turned down 4 offers from bigger firms. One of them even offered a VP title and a salary that would have paid off my mortgage in 2 years. But I stayed because Halcyon felt like mine. Not in title, not on paper, but in bones, it was mine because I'd patched it at 2A. During a 0-day scare, because I remembered the old passwords, because I could hear a failing node in the rhythm of the logs, because I cared when no one was watching. Now they were watching someone else. Now Brandon Tate stood where I used to stand, smiling through jargon he barely understood, reaping the benefits of groundwork he'd never laid. And still, I wasn't angry, not yet, because I hadn't reached the part where I stopped believing in them. That came later, and when it did, when I saw what was really happening, it didn't hurt the way I thought it would. It sharpened me. The first time I noticed something was wrong. It was small, a revoked permission here. And I'm a locked log file there. Harmless on their own systems get updated. Privileges get reassigned. Normal operational noise, except it wasn't. I'd had full admin access for over a decade, and now I was locked out of directories I'd personally built. When I flagged it to IT, they said it must have been a policy refresh. Happened across the board, they claimed, but I checked. Kyle still had access. So did Nick. Only mine had been trimmed. I didn't push. Not then. I just started watching. Then Brandon showed up. He wore expensive shoes and asked questions with too much confidence. On his second day, he introduced a new protocol for system evaluations. One I hadn't reviewed, let alone approved. When I pointed this out, he smiled like I was being quaint. This is high-level stuff, he said. I wouldn't worry about it. Elaine, we're optimizing. That word again, always used by people who didn't understand what they were dismantling. Soon, he was everywhere, leading security reviews he didn't understand, presenting audits based on dashboards I hadn't authorized. Every time I corrected something, it quietly reverted within days. I started digging. It was subtle at first. A consulting invoice from a firm I'd never heard of, Seaview Analytics. The description was vague. System Resilience Assessment. Phase Y. The cost, $130. Hours in no one. That same firm popped up again the next week. And the next, I pulled logs, scanned transaction codes. I knew the procurement API well. I'd helped design it. I recognized the payment patterns. Recurring transfers just below the review threshold. Classic laundering structure. Then I found the owner of the billing account, Jared Whitmore, the CFO's brother-in-law. I sat very still for a long time. This wasn't bad bookkeeping. This was a shell company, siphoning money from a system I had helped protect. I wasn't sidelined because I was outdated. I was removed because I was dangerous. I knew how to trace transactions. I knew where the logs lived. I knew which approval chains were forged and which weren't. And worst of all, for them, I was meticulous. I didn't confront anyone, not yet. Instead, I began backing everything up, quietly, methodically. I set permissions on private drives, exported email trails, indexed log timestamps. I built timelines, linked payments, and annotated every decision point with a corresponding executive approval, because this wasn't an oversight. This was a purge, and I wasn't the only one they'd cleared out. Other senior engineers had been pushed aside or reassigned in the past year, always the ones who asked too many questions, always replaced by someone flashier, faster, more obedient. They thought I was gone. They thought I would stay gone. But they didn't know I was still watching, and I hadn't even begun. I didn't sleep the night I found the final thread. It was buried in a flagged transaction log, an auto-renewal on a maintenance contract I never signed. The vendor listed wasn't even in our internal supplier registry, just a shell name. A recycled address from an old web hosting company in Miami. I ran a recursive trace through the routing path, and there it was again. Seaview Analytics, the same company billing Halcyon 6 figures for infrastructure redundancy mapping. The same company tied to Jared Whitmore. The final signature approving that transaction. Brandon Tate, he wasn't just incompetent, he was complicit, and they'd let him in, pushed me out, because they needed a closer, someone who could move paper, blind the board with buzzwords, and funnel money through the gaps I'd spent years closing. That was the moment the air left my lungs. Not from grief, from clarity. They hadn't replaced me because I was obsolete. They'd erased me because I knew too much. I was a firewall they couldn't breach, so they disabled me instead. I sat alone in my apartment, lights off, the glow of a single monitor, painting shadows across the wall. 17 years of loyalty, of patches applied at 3A, of systems that never crashed because I stayed up watching logs scroll past like falling code rain. I opened a folder I hadn't touched in years, in Jabber. Legacy, backup, auth. Inside were copies of the original architecture protocols, back when only 2 of us handled admin approvals. One of them had been me. The other, Gisgleiker. Long retired, the archive was clean, time-stamped, immutable, and full of signatures mine and theirs. Every approval, every deviation, every unexplained invoice. They had tried to scrub me out of the system, but they forgot. I built the system. I could read every fingerprint they thought they'd wiped, every soft override, every falsified token key. The beauty of designing security protocols is that you know where the invisible trails are, breadcrumbs left in the metadata, the ones that don't show up unless you know where to look. I compiled everything, laid out the data like evidence in a cold case. I didn't rage, I didn't drink, I didn't spiral. I just worked, and when I reached the final node, when the last document slotted into place, I made a call to Kyle. He'd been my intern once, now a lead systems analyst at a partner firm, still sharp, still ethical. When he picked up, I didn't say hello. I just said, I need a clean channel to Halcyon's board, quiet, verified, no backflow. He paused only a moment before saying, You have it. I closed the laptop. For the first time in months, I slept because I wasn't afraid anymore. I was ready. Everything had to be exact. I wasn't going to win by shouting. I was going to win with precision, with timestamps, with unalterable truth. I started with a timeline, 17 years of system evolution, distilled into key turning points. I mapped when each financial control shifted, when procurement privileges moved into hands that had no reason holding them. I cross-referenced them with Brandon Tate's arrival and Jared Whitmore's company forming its first contract. All the lines connected. I didn't need conjecture. I had metadata, invoices, time-stamped 1 minute after emails that hadn't been sent yet, approval chains rerouted through inactive accounts, license renewals greenlit by people who no longer worked at Halcyon. And then there was the shell routing pattern. 5 vendors, all different names, all paid through the same parent LLC, registered to the same P.O. box in Tallahassee. I verified the records through Florida's business registry. Jared's name was right there in the filings. It was textbook corruption, but I knew evidence alone wouldn't be enough. It needed weight. So I layered the report with annotations. I walked the board through each technical decision, like I was teaching them a language. Here is how your audit process was circumvented. Here is where the firewall logging was turned off by someone without clearance. Here is a copy of the original protocol I wrote 10 years ago. Still functional, still trusted, still ignored. I timestamped everything with UTC, encrypted the final document, created 3 backups, one offline, one in a secure cloud, one in the hands of Kyle. He helped build the final package, helped me anonymize the delivery, and ensure it couldn't be intercepted. His firm had clean legal ties to Halcyon's board, and he knew exactly when to push the button. We timed it for bonus day, the one day the board would be fully present. Signatures inked, attention sharpened by millions of dollars in year-end disbursements. A perfect moment, one-on-one no one would dare ignore. The email went out at 9. Psych, no name on it, just a subject line. Urgent, systemic fraud, technical evidence attached. We didn't need to say who it came from. The report spoke for itself. I watched it all from my living room, coffee in hand, news alerts pinging one by one. First, a quiet internal memo, then chatter from inside channels, then full silence. By noon, Halcyon's internal systems were in audit lockdown. By 2 p.m. The board had suspended 4 executives, including the CFO. I didn't smile. Not yet, because I wasn't finished. They thought they'd gotten away with burying me under a stack of NDAs and jargon, but they'd buried me alive. And now I was surfacing. They flew me in under a different name. No announcement, no internal memo, just a black car waiting at the terminal, and a badge with the Halcyon logo, but no title. When I stepped into the building, it felt different, not colder, quieter, like the tension had been sucked out and replaced with something heavier. The boardroom was full, 8 members, 3 external auditors, 2 attorneys from compliance. No Brandon, no CFO, just vacant chairs and open folders. Vanessa Miles, the board chair, stood as I entered. "Elaine," she said, "thank you for coming." I nodded. "Let's begin." The air in the room shifted. They didn't ask for a presentation. They'd already read the report. What they wanted now was clarity, interpretation, context from the one person who knew the system better than anyone alive. I walked them through it, cleanly, calmly. "This line," I said, pointing to the screen, "shows the procurement approval override. This isn't just negligence. It's deliberate redirection of funds through controlled shell accounts." I clicked again. "Here, we see access granted to Seaview Analytics at 2RC. Kunchigyarchipwawi dear. 14 Ostitoin. A time when no authorized admin was active. This violates our internal security protocols. The signature was spoofed, but the device ID traces back to a known machine in the CFO's office. Every word landed like a dropped stone in a still pond. The attorneys whispered to each other. One board member leaned forward, his knuckles white. "You documented all of this while still employed." I met his eyes. I had to once they shut down my access. I knew something was being hidden. I wasn't sure how deep it went until I saw where the payments led. He nodded slowly. "And what would you suggest we do now?" I paused. This was the moment. "I don't want my old job back," I said. That role was built for a version of Halcyon that no longer exists. I set a single-page proposal on the table. But if you're serious about rebuilding, if you want an architecture of integrity, I'm willing to return. On one condition, they read the heading, Chief Information Integrity Officer, direct report to the board, full independence, no intermediary access, silence. Then Vanessa spoke. You'd come back only if I'm empowered to clean house, not for punishment, for prevention. She looked around the room. One by one, heads nodded. We'll draft the offer by morning. I turned to leave, and that's when I saw it. Brandon's nameplate, already removed from the door. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt ready. They hadn't expected me to come back, but they needed someone to rebuild the thing they tried to hollow out and sell off. And I had already started sketching the blueprints. I came back on a Tuesday. No welcome banner, no staged handshake, just a new badge, an empty office with glass walls, and access credentials that bypassed every middle manager in the building. It was exactly what I asked for. The new title, Chief Information Integrity Officer, was more than optics. It came with real authority, full visibility, direct reporting to the board. My role wasn't to maintain the system. It was to protect it from neglect, from fraud, from the quiet erosion that happens when leadership stops listening. The first thing I did was audit everything, not just the code, but the people who had access, who approved what, which hands had touched the architecture when they had no business near it. I scrubbed the logs clean, traced shadow credentials, and started rebuilding the trust chain. Kyle joined as my first hire. We didn't even need to speak much. He already knew what I was doing. Together, we built a small team, young, sharp, no taste for politics, engineers who understood that power didn't come from visibility. It came from understanding the machinery beneath the surface. Brandon was gone. The CFO was under federal investigation. Several others resigned quietly, their exits buried in legal clauses and quiet settlements. But that wasn't what people remembered. They remembered the silence, how, without a single press release or statement, the tide turned, how the systems suddenly got better, how access controls were restructured, how response times improved, how bloat vanished, how the hallway gossip shifted from who's in charge now to Elaine's back. Isn't she? And then the legend started to form. I never claimed it. Didn't need to. I kept my door open, my head down, and my documentation airtight. Over coffee, interns would whisper the story like it was folklore. She brought down the old guard without saying a word. She caught them red-handed with logs and logic. They erased her, and she rebuilt the whole damn place. None of them got it quite right. I didn't take revenge. I took responsibility because the system I helped build had been compromised, not just technically, but morally. And if I didn't fix it, someone else would come in one day and find the same cracks. So I made it stronger. I updated protocols, embedded ethics into onboarding, and created a new rule. Every major system change required not just approval, but understanding. If you couldn't explain it, you didn't get to touch it. And quietly, the culture began to shift, not because I raised my voice, but because the truth backed by proof echoes louder than any title. I wasn't there to reclaim my past. I was there to protect the future, on my terms, with no nameplates, no speeches, just clean architecture and clear eyes.